order for me to explain to you the kind of treat that we are in for with our featured speaker tonight, I have to take just a moment to tell you one little thing about myself. When I was 5 years old, my father was a hotel manager. I was growing up in Bermuda. And when I was 5 years old, I saw the Thunderbirds in F-100s. And I dropped my ice cream cone, and I said, that's what I want to do. And for the following 12 years, until I was a junior in high school, I was going to go to the Air Force Academy. I was going to shoot down communists at supersonic speeds. And then I was going to command a mission to Mars, and that was my future, and that was what I was looking forward to. And that's entirely what I expected I would be doing. However, I failed the vision test for the Air Force Academy, and that was the end of that. So I had a number of friends who basically dragged me out and took me out, and we started making movies. And since the age of 16, I've been thinking, well, if I can't be an astronaut or a fighter pilot, maybe I can write about them. So I've been a writer since I was 16. And that means that tonight, it is an enormous honor and pleasure for me to introduce to you the world's greatest living alchemist. Alchemist. Any kind of writing is magic. It's just magic if you think about it. It's a voice in your head. I've read every single word that Mark Twain ever wrote in stories. I've read everything he ever wrote in letters. I've read all of his speeches. Sam Clemens is a close friend of mine. I just have to say, Mark Twain was not a fan of Jane Austen. And Mark Twain once said, you know, any library that didn't have a Jane Austen book in it would make a pretty good library out of a library that didn't have any books at all. We've all had moments when we've been facing this cultural tide that we deal with on a daily basis, where we're determined we're going to go out and fight, and then we get in the spotlight and people start looking at us, and we start feeling the social proof and all the social pressure against us, and we feel ourselves backtracking. And a writer once said 500 years ago, thus conscience doth make cowards of us all. And the native hue of resolution is sullied over with the pale cast of thought, that creeping cowardice, that voice in the back of your head that weakens your commitment to do something. That was William Shakespeare talking about what Hamlet was going through 500 years ago. That voice is in my head today. That's magic. There's no other word for it. It's magic. All writers create magic, but screenwriting and playwriting is different. It's different. And it's different because a storyteller can present the scenery, he can change his pace, he can change his intonation, he can use anecdotes, he can get laughter, he can do all of these things. A novelist can go even further. A novelist can tell you what is going on inside of the head of the character as he's experiencing those emotions. But a playwright doesn't get to do that, because a playwright has to be an alchemist, and the essence of alchemy is reduction. It's reduction. It is taking elements, putting them through a fire assay, adding a few drops of mercury, maybe a sprinkle of sulfur or antimony or whatever the case may be, boiling it down, boiling it down, boiling it down, getting it to its absolute essence until there's nothing left but what it is that manufactures the absolute truth that you're trying to talk about. A playwright and a screenwriter has to take the spectrum of human emotion, all of it, and reduce it to a series of black squiggles on a piece of white paper. He has to take all of human emotion, reduce it to black squiggles on white paper, and then hand it over to an actor who, if he is talented enough, will essentially rehydrate that concentrated experience. That essence, that reduction, is what makes a screenwriter and a playwright different than everybody else. So let me just give you one small example of what that kind of alchemy consists of. There's a play that's written by our speaker called Glengarry Glen Ross. And in Glengarry Glen Ross, which is about desperation, fear, anxiety, pressure, all of this, you've got a bunch of very desperate men in a dark, rainy room at nighttime, and somebody comes out in order to motivate them, and this is what he says. He says, as you all know, First prize is a Cadillac Eldorado. Anybody want to see second prize? Second prize is a set of steak knives. Third prize is you're fired. That's 4 sentences, 30 words. That's 30 words to encompass the entire spectrum of all of the emotions that are experienced in that room. All of the humility and the envy and the ambition and the pressure and all of it. It all is done in 30 words. The stakes are set in 30 words. So in a small rainy room in a real estate office in the middle of downtown Palookaville, a man like David Mamet is able to play the entire human experience with 30 pieces of gold, because that's what they are, they're pure gold. Not too long ago, David Mamet wrote an article, and in this article, he basically said that he is leaving the left. And when he wrote that article, he must have been observant enough to know, I cannot believe that he wouldn't be observant enough to know, that what he was accomplishing by writing that article about leaving the left was an admission. Let me rephrase this. There's an old joke that says, when you die, you lose a friend. I'm sorry, when a friend dies, you lose a friend. When you die, you lose all your friends. And David Mamet could not have been unaware of the fact that by publishing this article about his departure from the left, he would not only be losing all of his friends, he would be losing criticisms, launching criticisms upon himself and upon his work, which is frankly unforgivable. So in any event, let me just close by saying this. You've heard enough from this set of steak knives. Right now, it's a great privilege and honor of my lifetime as a University of Florida theater major dropout for me to present you with one brand new Cadillac Eldorado, Mr. David Mamet.
Hiya, kids, hiya, hiya. That's from television, about 1952. I wrote this here speech, but I remembered that I used to be the unofficial assistant fundraiser for our temple oratora. So I was in charge of costing the temple a huge amount of money, because I say, just play the frickin' pledge, would you please? And if you don't, I think you're a deadbeat. So that's, the temple went broke, and but I think the best thing I ever did in my life as a public speaker, when I was 1 year and there was Rosh Hashanah, and I was giving the fundraising speech, and I wrote this huge speech, and I was going up to the Bima to give the speech, and I said, forget it. I said, I took out a piece of paper, and I said, would the owner of a 2004 Bentley please donate $75,000 to the show? It's a good speech. I don't know if it made any money. So anyway, I was thinking that we all know what's going on. That's why we're here, right? And we all know the abuses. And what do I know that you don't know? And I thought, well, I tell you what I know that you don't know is I know how to write a play, because I know how a play works. And just like a doctor making a diagnosis, all the amateur playwrights, who's basically everybody in the world except for about 25 people, think that they're going to write the play about how they feel and about how people feel. But it's like the patient who comes to the doctor and he says, when I get up in the morning, I feel this, and sometimes when I hear a buzz, and the doctor doesn't care. The doctor wants to know about your pulse and your respiration, right, and your digestion, and your blood pressure. Because the doctor has to make a diagnosis which has very, very little to do with how you feel. And also, if you're a patient, you're going to lie, right? So what do I know about playwriting? It's very, very difficult because it's all mechanical. It's not about, some people can write great dialogue, and great dialogue is nice, but a play doesn't actually need great dialogue, which we know because we listen to many plays in translation. So what we're really following is not the great dialogue, but we're watching what does the person do? What do they always do? So actors talk about the character, but as Aristotle, a Greek, told us, all that a character is habitual action. We look at the character, all we see what the character did, that's all the character is. And it's the same thing in life. When we speak about somebody's character, we don't speak about the way they present themselves, but from watching them over a certain amount of time, we make a determination, this is what their character is. Okay, so I'm looking around and at the last 10 years, and as a dramatist, some plays are very, very difficult to write because they just don't make sense. You can't make it come out even. I say, I know the person must do this in this scene, but it doesn't make sense. So writing a play is constantly, or a screenplay, a dialectic between what does the person always do in order to get the goal, and then saying, well, maybe the goal is wrong, and that's why I can't make the scene work. So it's a very difficult process, and sometimes you get lucky and it just hurts a little, but most of the time it hurts a lot because it just doesn't, you can't make it make sense. But if you're a playwright, just like a doctor, or just like a pilot, you have to make it make sense, right? The pilot says, whatever's wrong in the plane, there's nobody here but us chickens, I gotta fly the plane. And the doctor has to say, the diagnosis doesn't make sense, but I'm going to stick with it until it does because that's my job. There has to be an answer. So, and if you're a doctor or a pilot or you're a playwright, it's your job to figure that answer out, and sometimes it just hurts like hell. Because when you're a writer, as Hemingway said, writing's easy, all you got to do is sit down at the typewriter and bleed. So, because what you're working with is your own mind, and we're all so in love with our own abilities. I can write dialogue, I can write this great description, but if you can't keep the audience's attention for the length of time, you've failed. And the only way you can keep the audience's attention is by making them wonder what's going to happen next. So that's what I do for a living. So I'm looking at the events of the last wonderful little while, and I'm saying it just doesn't make sense. I don't know where all of the actions indicate an overriding objective, which is what a dramatist does. I say, I don't understand how Queers for Palestine is on the same level with open the borders and vaccine mandates and pull out of Afghanistan and on and on and all, and we have to teach kids about sexual depravity. Where do they all meet? I don't understand. I can't identify a single overriding intelligence. It's not the Democratic Party, right? It's not the Obama, although they have their objectives, it's not the Obama coup. What the hell is going on? And so as I said it long enough, I began to use a tool that I learned pretty early on, is when something doesn't work, you can't figure out the problem, consider it a solution. So I said, just like, for example, a young woman says, why do I always meet the wrong guy? Why do I always meet the wrong guy? Well, that's rhetorical. So if you take out the why, she's left with, I always meet the wrong guy, right? Well, that's true. What would I like to do about it? Because then why is not important. It's not important why you meet the wrong guy. You've just clarified the problem rather than investing in the miasma of self-reflection. So the problem, I can't make it make sense. None of these things add up to an overriding objective, I realized was the solution. That there was no overriding objective, but rather what there was in the coup was a confluence of, as Ben Shapiro said in his new book, scavengers at an open city. That the Obama administration has said, I've had my fun, I've ruined, everything's going fine, I'm going to go back to Martha's Vineyard. And the new administration had not come in. So it was just like Paris in 1944 or Moscow in 1812. The city was open. So you had all of these warring people taking advantage of my parents went to Florida and there's nobody here. And so what I was looking at, I recognized it as a committee meeting, right? So, and having worked in a writer's room in television for a bunch of years, it's absolutely the worst place in the world, because what you're doing is outsourcing responsibility. So everybody in the writer's room is saying, well, you know, this is not such a good idea that Jimmy had, but he voted for me, and I have to have some cohesion in the group, so you're turning out garbage all the time. So what I realized was all of the underlings, realizing there was nobody there, were trading favors with each other, right? You want to get out of Afghanistan. Okay, I'll let you get out of Afghanistan, but I want to put men and women's sports. Well, that's ridiculous. Why would men want to play in women's sports? Well, do you want to get out of Afghanistan or not? What is it? Right? You know what else? I want to defund the police. Well, you're out of your fucking mind. Why would you want to defund the police? I know, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I will vote for the teachers union gets to tell the kids about anal intercourse. What do you want to do? Are you in or out? So that's, so now it began to make sense. I said, it's an open city. So then my next question is, how did this come about? What caused it? So what I said is I have to look at the difference between a drama and a tragedy. A drama is about circumstances. It's about things not in an individual's control. For example, death of a salesman. He's a salesman. He's having a hard time as a salesman. Okay, but his plight does not come from his choice. Othello's plight comes from his choice. Hamlet's plight comes from his choice. So in a tragedy, what happens is there's an initial event. For example, in Hamlet's case, his father died. The initial event in this tragedy is that there's no president there. Right, the country is left without a president. And so what's going to happen is that the people are going to, through their choices, each of which seems good, bring about their own demise, which is what a tragedy is. So I said to myself, I get that. That's human nature, right? Human nature, like Bill mentioned Mark Twain, who said the most wonderful thing. He was in Europe and someone said, I want you to come to this meeting at this cafe. You're going to meet the most interesting people. And Mark Twain said, I met him before. I met him on the river. There's only so many ways in which things can go wrong, right? Which is the lesson of tragedy, right? That we have these impulses, and we have this Yetzer Hara, which is the evil impulse that wants to make us believe in our own intelligence, right? And so tragedy is a people losing their own intelligence to lead them to their own destruction. So why would all of these people in the tragedy of the coup, and we came this close, as we all know, to the end of the United States of America, which would have meant the end of the West. Why would they do this? So the answer is, I say, well, okay, dude, you know, I used to be a cab driver for a living. I saw a lot of people. So I met these people before I met them on the river. So what I was looking at was going back to the Bible and Proverbs. What's the worst thing in the world? A servant when he reigneth. You don't want to give power to people who've been underlings and are weak and are going to use it for destructive purposes. So how did all those people get there? And the answer is prosperity. Because especially on the left, they keep using these buzzwords and tautologies, change and a new tomorrow and progress and freedom and a new way forward. But change actually, if you're a tragedian, actually equals decay. Because anything that grows at the expense of something else, which is what Milton Friedman told us. Anytime the government says it's going to help X, Y, Z, you have to ask who's it going to hurt? Because there's only so many resources, and resources given to A can't be given to B. The question is who allocates resources, and the answer of the Constitution is don't do it. Don't allocate. It's not the job of government to allocate resources, not the job of government to do good. So how do these people come into power? And the answer is prosperity, because as the tree grows toward the light, it's got to be pruned every once in a while, or the branch system is going to overpower the root system, and the tree's going to fall down in the breeze. So I was thinking about labor negotiations, right? So imagine that a guy is he's a worker. He works on a lathe, and he becomes the shop steward, and then he becomes the head of the local, and then he becomes the head of the international, and he meets with the director of the great conglomerate that his people work with. And the director of the great conglomerate says, oh, I see that you made you mentioned golf. Do you play golf? Yes, I do. Well, why don't you come out and play with me at Augusta? So the guy says, okay, and he plays with him at Augusta, right? What's wrong with that? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. But what occurred to me is the shop steward is never going to say, you know what, why don't you come out with me next week and play on the public course, right? Because change has to equal decay. We're here for a very, very limited amount of time, and that's the lesson of the Constitution. Let's keep it simple, stupid. It all comes down to this. One kid cuts the pie, the other kid gets first choice. That's it, right? Or the Torah on one foot, right? What is hateful to you, don't do to others. That's it. Everything has to proceed from there. So we all know short sleeves to short sleeves in 3 generations. Some of us have seen it, some of us have participated in it. It's kind of inevitable because growth has to equal decay. The cities have grown to such a place that they're no longer necessary. So they've fallen into decay because there's no purpose for them, because the life force has moved. Just as the Erie Canal gave, you could have the best canal boats on the Erie Canal. When the railroads came in, doesn't make any difference. You can't lure people back to the Erie Canal. And you can't lure people back to the cities, because if they're no longer the small industry hubs, if they're no longer the transportation and the communication hubs, and if there's no reason for the financial markets to be there, they price the middle class out of existence, they're dead. They ain't coming back. Mr. Kurtz is dead. He ain't coming up the river no more. That's life, right? So life is not a drama, but life is really a tragedy. So I was thinking about O.J. O.J., the story of O.J. was a drama. It was a sick drama where everybody knew we were going to spend an inordinate amount of time adjudicating whether or not, because of slavery, a black man would or would not be acquitted of murdering 2 innocent human beings. That was a sick drama, nothing to do with O.J., nothing to do with anything that he did. On the other hand, I was just looking at a perfect example of a drama the other day, which is Bill Belichick, right? This is a drama which is a tragedy, because Belichick is the winningest coach, right, in NFL history, I think. And then he goes and he meets a young girlfriend, okay, and then he goes and he gets spanked at, in his opening game for North Carolina, and this guy, there's no difference between Bill Belichick and King Lear. It's exactly the same story. King Lear ends up wacky and crazy on the board, and Bill Belichick's got to go back into the locker room. So what are we really looking at here? That the newspaper is a record of drama, right? It's things that happen, and what are we going to do about them? And a bad drama, you see it on Broadway, is I'm going to let you get mad. I'm going to let you get mad because people don't like Jews or people don't like gays or people don't like blacks. Come and get mad, right? That's the drama, because it deals with circumstance, which means that the individual has no motive power. On the other hand, the Torah deals with tragedy. Everyone has a choice, and they choose wrong. As my rabbi used to say, there's nobody in the Torah you wanted to be like. So if we go, it's also the West, which is teetering on the brink and seems through the grace of God to have gotten a reprieve, and up to us to use that reprieve, that the story of the West is really the story of the transition in the Bible from the story of a family up until the family becomes the state. And the place at which the family becomes the state, Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph, and so forth become the state, is with the birth of Moses. And Moses is all in charge of dealing with getting the people to freedom. And the only difficulty Moses encounters in that is the Jews. It's true. The most powerful people in the world, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Edomites, the Egyptians, big deal, kaboom, hot knife through butter. But the Jews drive him crazy, right? Because the Jews don't want freedom, right? Because they say constantly to Moses, weren't there enough graves in Egypt? Did you bring us out here to die in the desert? And Moses at one point says to God, next they will stone me, right? So as Dennis Prager used to say, the Torah is not the record of what happened, it's the record of what always happened. So just as Moses says, next they will stone me, as you know, that's the story of you, and that's the story of Donald Trump. Someone who wants to stand up for freedom is going to get turned on by the weak, unless they have religion, unless they believe in the fact that there are God-given rights and we have God, and therefore we have God-given responsibilities. So, thank you. So everybody believes in freedom, but some people, they want freedom from thought, and that's just the way they are, right? Because human beings we're a bunch of wacky critters, aren't we? And we really aren't very good and we really aren't very smart, but there's always the possibility of excellence if it comes out of dedication to something stronger than ourselves. And finally, I was reading my good friend Napoleon, Maxims of Napoleon, who was, as you know, was a Jew. And he said, it's much wiser to despise the opinions of your adversaries than to seek to reason with them and to upbraid them with their variability. And I thought, man, that's one smart Jew, right? that the problems in front of us are clear, right? And so what we should do is, it says in the Bible, is choose life, and to choose life means to choose freedom. Thank you very much.